Welcome back to Apex Sci-Fi. Today we begin a new chapter in the history of the Terran Reach. We are moving away from the wars of conquest and into the era of the specialist. In a galaxy filled with ancient empires and godlike technology, everyone eventually hits a problem they cannot solve with a laser or a spreadsheet. When the laws of physics break, when the darkness looks back, or when the job is simply too suicidal for a civilized soul, the galaxy calls the Oort cloud. They call the mercenaries of Sol. The luxury liner Ethlgard's dream was supposed to be the pinnacle of safe travel. It was a golden palace of glass and light, designed to carry the wealthiest scions of the High Consortium across the stars in absolute comfort. But during a routine jump through the Veil Nebula, the ship's slipstream drive suffered a catastrophic harmonic misalignment. It didn't explode. It didn't crash. It did something much worse. It snagged on the fabric of the three-dimensional universe. The dream became a ghost. It was trapped in a state of permanent interphase, flickering between our reality and a dimension that the human mind can only describe as a geometric nightmare. To anyone inside the ship, the walls no longer stayed vertical. The floors became ceilings. Light began to travel in circles, and colors appeared that had no names in any known language. For the alien passengers, the effect was immediate and devastating. The High Consortium species are masters of logic and sensory precision. Their brains are highly tuned to the harmony of the universe. When they looked at the flickering, non-Euclidean geometry of the void breach, their minds simply fractured. It was a visual poison. They suffered from sensory vertigo, a condition where the brain tries so hard to make sense of impossible shapes that it eventually triggers a total neural collapse. Within an hour, the ship was a drifting asylum of catatonic billionaires and screaming guards. The consortium sent 3 rescue teams. All 3 were lost. Their high-tech drones spun in circles, blinded by the spatial distortion. Their elite commandos entered the ship and were found minutes later wandering the airlocks, clawing at their own eyes to make the colors stop. That was when they sent the signal to the Oort cloud. They reached out to the Sol system, to a group of humans known as the Blind Bats. Captain Elias Thorne, a veteran of the Jovian Wars and a man who had seen enough of reality to not mind losing a bit of it, stood in the airlock of the breach shuttle. Beside him were his 2 best operators, Sarah Touch Miller and Big Mike Henderson. They weren't looking at the shimmering, distorted hull of the luxury liner. In fact, they weren't looking at anything. Thorne pulled his heavy tactical helmet over his head. The visor was a solid plate of reinforced carbon fiber. There were no cameras, no glass, no digital display. He was in total darkness. "Suit check," Thorne said, his voice calm and steady. "Miller, how are the haptics?" "Green across the board, Cap," Miller replied. Her gloves were covered in thousands of microscopic vibrating sensors. The sonar pings are messy because of the spatial folding, but the physical feedback is solid. "As long as I can touch it, I know where it is." "Mike." "I've got the cable," the giant mercenary grunted, patting a thick spool of high-tensile wire attached to his belt. "We stay tethered. We don't need eyes to find the way back if the string is still there." The consortium representative, a bird-like creature in a shielded environmental suit, watched them in horror. You are going in without sight? The ship is a visual labyrinth. You will fall into the tears. You will be lost in the folds." Thorne turned his blinded helmet toward the alien. "That's the mistake your boys made. They tried to see their way through. You can't see the 4th dimension, pal. Your brain tries to map it and it fries your circuits. But my hands? My hands don't care about 4-dimensional geometry. If a wall feels like a wall, it's a wall. We're not here to look at the scenery. We're here to get the VIP." The airlock hissed open. The interior of the Ethelgard's dream was a kaleidoscope of madness. Purple lightning arched across the hallways. The floor seemed to stretch for miles and then shrink to an inch. A fountain of wine in the center of the lobby was flowing upward, freezing into burning ice. It was a scene that would have rendered any biological observer unconscious in seconds. The humans stepped inside. They didn't hesitate. They didn't stumble. They moved with a strange, rhythmic grace. Miller led the way, her hands constantly skimming the walls. She was feeling the vibrations of the ship's internal structure. To her, the flickering reality didn't matter. The atomic density of the bulkhead stayed the same whether it looked like a rainbow or a shadow. "Step up," Miller whispered. "The floor is pitching 10 degrees. There's a spatial tear 3 feet to our left. I can feel the air pressure dropping near the edge. Stay centered on the tether." They were navigating by the feel. Humans have a unique neurological trait called proprioception, the internal sense of where our limbs are in space. We don't need to see our feet to know where they are. Combine that with a lifetime of dirty sensory environments on Earth, thick fogs, dark mines, and blinding storms, and the human brain becomes surprisingly good at ignoring what the eyes see in favor of what the body knows. They reached the grand ballroom. It was a disaster area of floating furniture and weeping aliens. In the center of the room, encased in a high-tech survival pod, was the target, the young prince of the High Consortium. The pod was flickering, half-phased into a dimension of gray mist. "There he is," Mike said, his voice vibrating through the tether. "But the floor between us and him is, well, it isn't there. The sensors say it's a 50-foot drop into a subspace pocket." "Doesn't matter what the sensors say," Thorne commanded. "Miller, find the structural beams. There's got to be a support skeleton that hasn't phased out yet." Miller closed her eyes, not that it mattered behind her blacked-out visor, and reached out. She tapped the air with a specialized acoustic hammer. The sound didn't travel like a normal echo, it warped and twisted. But she felt the return vibration in her feet. "There," she pointed at a section of empty air that looked like a swirling vortex of blue light. "The support strut is still there. It's just invisible to the eye. Trust the metal, boys." Thorne stepped out onto the nothingness. To an observer, it looked like he was walking on the sky. He felt the cold, hard steel beneath his boots. His mind screamed that he was falling, but his training whispered that the ground was solid. This was the human stubbornness that the mercenaries were famous for. If reality told a human one thing, and their gut told them another, they usually bet on their gut. They reached the pod. But as they touched it, the void reacted. The spatial distortion wasn't just a physical phenomenon, it was a hungry one. A void stalker, a semi-sentient manifestation of the interdimensional pressure, emerged from the ceiling. It was a creature made of shifting fractals and shards of broken time. It didn't have a solid form. It moved by changing the space around it. The previous rescue teams had tried to fight these things with lasers. But the lasers just bent around the creature's distorted gravity. The aliens had tried to track them with motion sensors, but the creatures moved through the folds of the room, appearing and disappearing at will. "Contact!" Mike yelled, feeling the sudden drop in temperature. "It's on the ceiling. Or the floor. I can't tell, the echoes are bouncing." "Don't look for it," Thorne roared. "Listen for the displacement. Feel the wind." A human has a primitive, lizard brain reflex for detecting movement in the dark. We can feel the change in air pressure when something large moves near us. We can hear the minute scuff of a footstep even over a storm. The void stalker lunged. It moved through a spatial fold, appearing inches from Thorne's face. If Thorne had been looking, the sight of the creature's shifting, multidimensional skin would have melted his brain. But Thorne was blind. He only felt the sudden whoosh of air and the smell of ozone. He didn't fire a laser. He pulled a gravity mace, a heavy, solid lump of dense lead wrapped in a kinetic pulse field. He swung it in a wide arc. The mace didn't care about the creature's visual distortion. It didn't care that the creature was phased. The mace had mass, and the creature, no matter how weird it looked, occupied space. Crack. The impact was a dull thud. The creature shrieked, a sound that was more of a vibration in the teeth than a noise in the ears. It tried to fold away, but Mike was already there. He didn't use a gun either. He used a pressurized foam grenade. The foam exploded, covering the invisible, distorted area. The foam didn't phase. It stuck to the creature's surface, giving the humans a physical target they could feel and hit. "It's a big one," Mike grunted, swinging a heavy industrial wrench. "But if it bleeds light, we can kill it." The battle was a chaotic, blind brawl in the middle of a collapsing reality. The humans moved like shadows, relying on each other's voices and the tension on their tethers. They fought the Void Stalker not with high-tech precision, but with the raw, brutal efficiency of a shipyard fight. They hammered at the void until the creature's spatial anchor snapped, and it was sucked back into the rift with a sound like a vacuum cleaner. "Pod is secure," Miller called out, her hands locked onto the VIP's transport. "The rift is widening. We need to move. Now." They didn't run. Running is how you lose your orientation. They moved back along the wire, a slow, deliberate retreat through the kaleidoscope of hell. They stepped over pits that looked like mountains and walked through walls that looked like fire. They ignored every single thing their eyes would have told them, trusting only the cold, thin wire of Mike's spool. They reached the airlock. They pushed the pod through. They stepped back into the shuttle and slammed the hatch. Only when the airlock was cycled and the clean room lights were on did Thorne remove his helmet. His face was pale and he was covered in a fine layer of gray void dust, but his eyes were steady. The consortium representative rushed forward, looking at the unconscious prince in the pod. You did it, you actually did it? We watched the feats, it was madness. How did you stay sane? How did you navigate that impossible geometry? Thorn took a long drink of water, his hands slightly shaking from the adrenaline. The geometry wasn't impossible, pal. It was just ugly. Your people are obsessed with the truth of what they see. Humans? We spend half our history in caves and the other half in cubicles. We know that what you see isn't always what's there. He looked at the shimmering wreck of the Ethlgard's dream as it finally snapped out of existence, lost to the void forever. Next time, Thorn said, wiping the dust from his jacket. Tell your prince to take a bus. And tell your accountants that the blind navigation surcharge is double. My ears are ringing. The mercenaries of Sol had completed their first major contract of the new era. They hadn't won with better technology or more soldiers. They had won because they were the only species in the galaxy that was comfortable being in the dark. The Galactic Council's new entry on the mercenaries of Sol was a warning to any employer who thought they could understand the human mind. Human mercenaries do not operate on the same sensory plane as the rest of the galaxy. They possess a terrifying ability to disconnect their perception from their environment. If reality becomes a weapon, the humans will simply ignore reality. Do not hire them for their strength. Hire them because they are the only ones who can walk through a nightmare and come out complaining about the coffee. Humanity had proven the ultimate mercenary HFY truth. The universe is a strange, terrifying place. But no matter how weird it gets, a human will still find a way to walk through it as long as there's a paycheck on the other side. This has been Apex Sci-Fi. Reality is just a suggestion. If you enjoyed this first mission of the Mercenaries of Sol, hit that like button. Comment below. If you had to navigate a haunted house in total darkness, who is the one person you'd trust to hold the rope? Subscribe for the next contract, the Sun Thieves. The rift is closed. The check is in the mail.